Welcome to another SEWAS Psychology online workshop. My name is Matt Yates and I'm here with my colleague.
My name's Vicky James Perkins. So you've joined us now on our session 6, which we're calling Relate. So just to put this in a bit of context, we've spent the first few sessions thinking about early trauma and what that means for your child in your parenting and your relationship. And we finally got to the section where we think about what you do in those really tough moments. So an important session before this was the importance of regulating, helping your child to regulate. And we're moving on today to how to think about the ways in which you relate to your child.
And just as before, a big basis for kind of the reason why we're doing it in this order is we are thinking about working with the ways that our brains work. So working from the bottom up. So a couple of times in our videos, we've been using this fantastic resource from Beacon House. And this has sort of been put together by Dr. Bruce Perry. And it's basically talking about how, because our brains grow and develop from the bottom up and inside out, very loosely, that kind of translates to, in the womb, first of all, the brainstem develops, and from there it's a limbic brain. And then the last bit to develop that carries on going to about our mid-20s is our cortical brain. And this kind of upside down triangle helps actually kind of illustrate, therefore, that's the reason we should work in this order. So the regulate is really focusing primarily on the brainstem. The relate bit is largely the limbic brain, and the reason bit is that cortical brain. And what this shows us is we have to do it in the correct order. If we jump straight to the top to that wonderful bit that adults love doing, which is logic and reason and kind of talking things through, it's probably not going to work very well. When we have a dysregulated child, we need to absolutely start at the bottom first with their brainstem. So we regulate that first. And then today's session, we're talking about the next step, relate. So, Vicky, you've got this slide here, which, kind of people might be wondering what on earth we're talking about here. So why are we talking about this idea of a comparison between a highway and a country road?
Yeah, and I think it's thinking about what you just said, Matt, with regards to our usual responses in parenting, particularly when we're parenting children from the ages of 3 up, is we go straight to what we know well, which is the reasoning logic part of our brain, the the lecture mode, or the trying to argue reasoning to our children. And I guess, and what we're asking of parents when that isn't working for their child, when they seem stuck and not being able to process that kind of information in a way that helps them learn, is we are asking parents to take a different route. So what we know is that this metaphor illustrates our neurology. So in our adult parenting brain, we'll be hardwired so neurologically, we'll have a very strong pathway created to try and reason with an adult or a child who's been unreasonable, who's done something wrong. So this is just to acknowledge, neurologically, we'll be kind of hardwired like a motorway. We'll go there straight. We know it. It's easy to get to. So it's just to say that I guess, you will still be doing that. You'll still be jumping to that reasoning part, that go-to parenting response, whether that's cut it out. Why are you doing that again? We've talked about this a million times, that stuff. And what we're thinking about today is asking you to kind of take a few steps on our triangle in a different way. And so neurologically, this is going to be very tricky initially. It's like you're having to take a new pathway in your brain that you've not really trodden down before. So we use the idea of this cornfield, and the first time you go down it, it's going to feel very effortful. So that's literally responding in a different way. Your neurons are going to make new connections. It's going to feel effortful. It's not going to feel easy. It's going to feel strange. And so what we're asking is to keep treading down this cornfield, and it's only through treading down this more and more that it starts to get a stronger path. And the analogy is that the weeds will grow over the motorway, and it'll be a less of a go-to. So I guess we find this helpful just to really acknowledge this isn't just about try say something different. You will be primed physiologically, neurologically, to do the things that you usually do in your responses. And that's absolutely understandable, and we can map it neuroscientifically or neurologically. so go easy on yourselves. We will always still go down that motorway in our responses, particularly when we're under fire from our kids.
Mm. And it's kind of, you know, it's almost that sense, isn't it, of kind of what we're suggesting is having a go at this country road. I guess kind of, you know, if you wake up and you've had, you know, maybe, you know, an all right amount of sleep, you're feeling like you've got a bit of resources, you're feeling like maybe I've got a couple more minutes extra to kind of just have a go at a different interaction. We're just asking you just to give it a try and kind of see how you find things. Okay. So I guess the key points of the things that we're going to be talking about today. So in Vic and I's work, we talk an awful lot about PACE. So this is a principle from DDP that was devised from Dan Hughes, and PACE stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. So for today, though, we really wanted us to focus, I guess, primarily on acceptance and empathy. So of course, that playfulness can still be there in your interactions with the child. And there may well be times when curiosity is really going to be helpful, but really just to kind of, if we're really focusing just primarily on that relationship in that moment, we're suggesting just have a go at just, acceptance and empathy. And then we're going to be moving on to talking about using a level of closeness that can be tolerated. So sometimes a child can be really able to accept you actually being physically touching them, close to them. Others, maybe that'll just be too much, too overwhelming. And we'll talk a bit about kind of being able to kind of judge what's going to be most helpful to your child in that moment. And a big part of that is often actually thinking about non-verbals and body language. So we're going to talk a bit more about that as well.
And I think just to remind everyone at this stage that our children will find it difficult for lots of different reasons to accept closeness sometimes, or real felt closeness. So really acknowledging that we can only kind of think about this stuff if they are regulated. So if they are calm in their bodies. Otherwise, and I guess just to acknowledge that sometimes when we make attempts to get closer to our kids, they will jump back into being dysregulated, and then we move back into helping them regulate again. Yeah.
Okay, so starting with acceptance. So to start off with, we've got this quote from Dr. Parent, which we just love because it really just captures, I guess, at its essence what we're talking about when we're using this word acceptance. So I'll just read it out now. So acceptance that my child's experiences are completely different from my own and will influence his response to incidents in a way I might struggle to understand. When I accept his feelings about a situation are valid, however illogical or unreasonable they might seem to me, and I don't have to try to explain to him why I might have misinterpreted the situation, this reduces the likelihood of conflict. I'm not always successful at this, but when I remember, his behavior is far less likely to escalate. So we really just like this quote because it really just ticks the boxes in terms of what we're talking about when we have acceptance. So let's just bring up another slide here to summarize that. So the really, really important take-home message when we're talking about acceptance is we're not at all saying that you need to accept all behavior and everything that your child might do. We're certainly not accepting unwanted or bad behavior. So, you know, it is not okay for you to get hit, for your child to hit their sibling, for, you know, your house maybe to be damaged, or anything really that is going to, you know, be unwanted or bad behavior. What we're talking about instead is we're actually going to accept the thoughts, the wishes, the desires, the urges, the emotions that are expressed or driving the behavior. So really accepting that in this moment for your child, their view of the world is X, and that their emotion is Y, and that for right now, that is just where they at, what they're feeling, and their perception of the situation. So the really, really tricky thing with this is often you won't agree. So you won't agree with what your child's interpretation of the world. It's really important to say that by accepting it, this does not mean that you are agreeing with them. You're just accepting that for them, that's how they see it. And now this is even harder when you know their interpretation is incorrect. You know that actually, you know, how they perceive something is not what has happened. And we're asking how even this moment is just to try and dig deep and just go, you need to accept that for your child, this is how they're interpreting it. And then I guess lastly, to be mindful that there'll be so many things which to our mind are tiny and insignificant, or even just, you know, if you could just pass on enough logical information, maybe your child will realize like it's not a big deal. And what we're suggesting for you is just to still try and stick with it and just say, even though you know it's nonsense and it's nothing to be concerned about, for your child it is a big deal, and just to stick with that and to accept it.
And I think the reason why acceptance is such a big deal for children who've experienced early trauma particularly is because for many occasions and times and weeks and months and perhaps years sometimes, is that they're in a world they've been absolutely alone in what they're experiencing and feeling and perceiving, and alone at times of real trauma and real fear and terror, or utter confusion without a safe, consistent person around them. So acceptance is a real big deal for them because they haven't really experienced it enough of the time. So they're perceiving the world in a certain way now, which, as Matt has said, often isn't, how it is. But it's really important that they start to have an experience of a safe, key adult attachment figure being right alongside them, no matter what, their internal world, their stick of rock inside.
Yeah, I guess I often try and kind of just, I guess, tap into that feeling of, perhaps when you're talking to like a friend maybe, and so often when you just have that experience of this person's accepting what I am saying, what I'm feeling, and my thoughts, it kind of just is also like a bit of a sigh of relief. You're kind of not going and thinking that you're going to have to fight your corner and kind of desperately get them to kind of be on the same page as you. So often, although it's different maybe for a child, I sort of often try and think about that myself and remember how different it feels when you just feel acceptance. So moving on to empathy. So I guess the summary for empathy, and this is the phrase I guess I use most frequently when I work with families, is just imagine that you're stepping into your child's shoes. So really trying to just see things from their perspective, even though you maybe think what's going through is ridiculous and not an issue to be worried about. Just having a go at stepping into imagining what they're going through, how they might perceive it. It's really important to say that this is not sympathy. So sympathy feels very, very different. So sympathy is kind of like, yeah, it seems pretty bad for you. That's a shame, isn't it? Whereas empathy is really stepping into imagining what that'd feel like and really embodying, gosh, yeah, if you were feeling that right now, that must be so, so hard. And then lastly, we're going to be talking about being with. So being with is a phrase that we find fantastic from the circle security training. And we'll be talking more about what we mean by that in a moment. Vicky, do you have anything to add to that before we move on?
No, I guess just empathy is really tricky because, and we'll talk about some examples, but it's just sort of a bit of a stance in yourself, isn't it? A sense sometimes, yeah, which can be hard, particularly when your child has been very challenging and your resources are low. So we'll think about how we might communicate that with our child, but I guess, yeah, just acknowledging it can be a really big generous emotion to have when you've just been run ragged with your child.
It's hard work. It's exhausting, isn't it? It does take resources to really allow yourself to feel empathy. Yeah. Okay, so what we've got here is we've just got some examples of things that your child might possibly say and what the adult could have a go at doing, which is just showing a bit more acceptance and empathy. So when Vicky and I put together this presentation, we kind of were aware that it was really hard for us to succinctly separate out acceptance and empathy. It was almost kind of just in the way that it came out our mouths, the two kind of came together. So we almost felt like it was best just to keep them together really, and just look at these sentences here as just examples of ways you might be able to respond to statements in a way that shows more acceptance and empathy. So Vicky, for the first go, do you want to just be the child to read them out, and I'll read the adult?
Okay, so I'm regulated enough, but I'm still upset about this whole issue, just to be clear. He is so stupid. I wish he was dead.
Oh, right now you just don't like your brother. You just want to tell him, go away. You wish you could be your mum's only kid.
And I'm just thinking about how I might say, because obviously we all kind of have different styles of talking and speaking. So I might say something like, if he was a 4-year-old, you're really fed up with him right now. I know, you've just had enough of him. You might say something like that.
And that's a really important point that Vicky's making, is how we've got some examples here, and you may look at these words and think, this is not at all what I would say, and that's absolutely fine. Everyone will have their own way of conveying acceptance and empathy, and this is just kind of examples. So don't read this and think, gosh, yeah, I have to do it exactly the same way it's written here. Should we do
And
the
I
next
guess we're
one?
trying to offer kind of a full articulate example so that
Mm.
then you can pick from it what fits with you. Yeah, in your way of talking, in your style. And of course, in the moment, it'll come out in a very authentic way anyway.
Should we do the
And
next one?
I guess, Matt, it might be helpful to say how we'd usually respond to a comment like that would be, don't be so unkind, don't speak like that about your brother, that's not a nice thing to say, which are all, and human responses as well. But I guess just to distinguish between how we might typically reply
Mm.
versus what acceptance might look like. So we're not
Mm.
saying, yeah, your brother is really stupid,
Mm.
yeah, I wish he was dead too. It's more about, right now you're furious with him, you're really fed up, you don't want any more to do with him, I get it, you've had a rotten day together, something like that.
Yeah, so I guess you're really tapping into accepting the emotion behind the words, that sort of feeling of, yeah, gonna get there. And it'd be so easy, wouldn't it, if that kind of comment to go, that's an awful thing to say. You mustn't wish your brother is dead. And in that moment, it's just the child is feeling so much anger and frustration. That's just a really easy go-to thing to say, isn't it? You simplify. If a brother wasn't here, things would be better. Yeah. Okay, so move to the next one.
Yeah. I want chocolate now, not after dinner.
God, you just love chocolate. It's your favorite. And hearing me say no must make you feel so angry. Like, it's so hard not being able to have the chocolate right now.
And I'm just wondering, how I would say that to, we hear that a lot of our young ones, like a 4-year-old. So for me, especially, I'm imagining if I'm a parent trying to juggle the saucepans or things coming out of the oven, and I've got my kids screaming at me, which is familiar to me actually. I might say something like, I know you love chocolate, you want it now and you can't have it. It's really hard. You really want it. I know. It's tough. It's hard. Just sometimes key phrases. And I guess one thing, Matt, that we're doing that we hadn't mentioned was we're trying to match the kind of energy of the child,
Mm.
not match the anger, but we often talk about kind of matching the tone or the energy. The reason why we're doing that is we're trying to show the child, we're trying to communicate to the child that, or your child, that you get that height of the emotion. So we're not going, I know you really don't like your brother right now, but we are kind of raising our voice and tone to go, I know you really have fed up with him, I get it. Because otherwise, if we do that whole, right now you're very angry with your brother, as you've just seen, felt, Matt, it's very patronizing, it doesn't really feel connecting.
Mm.
And when we talk about attachment and relationships, it's not really connecting it. We're not really sitting alongside them going, I get it, you're
Mm.
really fed up right now. So we're trying, it's a tricky balance to not
Mm.
match the anger, but match the kind of energy to it. So we're showing our child that we're in it with them.
Mm.
Like if you go home and talk to your friend or your partner about, God, this thing happens at work today. Oh, they're annoying. And our friend would, or partner would say, that sounds really annoying. Yes, that sounds awful, rather than, gosh, it sounds really tricky. It's just not a normal way of talking when we're really connected with
Mm.
someone, is it? Sorry, Matt, I was going off then.
No, but yeah, it's
Uh,
great.
we were
Yeah,
talking
I think
about,
it's, go on,
sorry,
keep going.
I was just thinking about, it's easier sometimes to give younger kid examples. And
Mm.
we talked a little bit about what this might look like if we had a teenager, didn't we?
Mhm.
So for a teenager, it might be something like, I want my Xbox now, not after dinner. I want it now. So again, that kind of, I'm just thinking about how I might respond, or the style I talk. I might say something like, I know you love playing on that. You've had a hard day. You really want to switch off with it now, and you're having to wait till after dinner. I know this is hard, or something like that.
Mm.
So kind of the same feeling, but in a more, I guess for me, that was, yeah, in a style that you talk with your teenage child rather than a young child.
Yeah. Should we go for the last one?
Yeah. You love ruining my life, don't you?
Oh wow, like no wonder you feel so angry. You feel like my rules are ruining your life. Well, it must be so frustrating not to be able to do what you want to do all the time.
Mm-hmm. I'm trying to offer quick, short ways, because
Mhm.
sometimes when our head is boggled, it's hard to pull to mind some kind of, yeah, some clearer way sometimes of explaining. I know you think I'm rubbish in everything. And no wonder you're angry with me. I know right now you feel I'm getting it all wrong. Not with a smile, sorry. I'm just saying it like that because because it just sounds familiar, doesn't it? That sense of, yeah. And it's really galling when you hear that from your child, when you've just given everything for them. You're working so hard. You're watching these kinds of videos to get different ideas about how to respond. So it's really hard sometimes to kind of hold that acceptance of right now in this moment they're feeling that.
Mm.
That's not yeah, so it's tricky, and I guess sometimes we do pull on a bit of a lightness. By lightness I mean that just that acceptance. Oh, right now you're really fed up with me, it feels like I'm ruining everything. I know, that kind of sense.
Yeah, excellent. So, so it may be that maybe you know those watching kind of give it a go, and maybe you start to feel like, oh, maybe I'm starting to get a bit of, you know, maybe every, you know, 1 in 5 goes, like I could have managed to put some words to it that seem to be a bit more accepting, a bit more empathy, and kind of feel matching in terms of the words that you'd feel comfortable saying. So it makes, you know, getting a bit of confidence in it's going well. And then all of a sudden, your child says some of these comments. Now, the reason we've got these here is because if your child says this kind of stuff and they do, it just feels so hard. You know, if your child says nobody loves me or you don't love me, your absolute natural first instinct is goes, oh my goodness, of course people love you. I love you so much. But what we're suggesting here is when you hear these, the hardest comments like these, to dig deep and try as hard as you can to still convey some acceptance and some empathy. So the examples we've got here are just how you could have a go at, by absolutely, you're not at all showing them that you agree with them and that you don't love them, but you're just accepting that that's in that moment how they feel. So the child says, nobody loves me. You can say, oh, sweetheart, like what a painful feeling to have. So we're tapping into that, you know, if someone thinks that, you know, that they're not loved, that is really painful and horrible. So I am bad. Like, gosh, like what a hard thought to have. You know, you must feel awful to feel that way. And then lastly, you hate me. Like you feel like my behavior means I hate you. God, that must be awful. So the reason
Mm.
we put these here is just because these are the comments that our kids will say, and it's comments that the families that Vic and I work with, you know, we talk about a lot, and we just say, yeah, they're so hard.
Mm.
Um, you know, but if you can really have a go at just being accepting and having empathy in this moment, you might start to see a bit of a different response.
And we talk a lot, Matt, don't we, about one of the biggest, you know, the kind of crossroads on, am I going to take the motorway here, or am I going to go down this new cornfield grass thing, whatever that was?
Mhm.
Um, and to go down our usual route would be to reassure, would be to say, of course, I don't hate you. I just get frustrated with your behavior, whatever. And what we're saying is try as best you can to, when you're resourced, to resist reassuring too soon. So
Mm.
for those of you kind of newer to this, you can still, so if we take the example of you hate me, so you can offer something like, gosh, is that how you feel? That must feel so bad. I'm so sorry that it feels like that. Before moving on to, I love you very much. I'm sorry, you know, I love you very much. Um, but right now, I'm just sad that it feels like for you that I don't. So you can still go on to reassure, but what kind of we're talking about is if we reassure too quickly, our children just feel alone in their emotions and that we don't get it, and the emotions stay. In fact, they sometimes just grow bigger. So that where possible, we always talk about resist reassuring too soon and try and find ways that you can communicate. I hear you, that must be hard. And if you're a kind of parent who feels okay with saying things like I often would use, I'm sorry it feels like that, that's awful. um yeah, but again that takes kind of a parent being resourced and not run down themselves. because that's hard emotion to hold in our kids.
It's really hard, and like we're sort of saying, it's even harder in these kind of comments to not go straight to that reassurance. You know, like I said, perhaps it could come later, as Vicky's describing. And I guess the only way I try and sort of tap into this myself is a bit like earlier when we were talking about, you know, imagine you're with another adult, perhaps a friend, and if you said to your friend something like, God, I'm just having such a hard time at work at the moment. And your friend responds, "Oh, don't worry, next week will be better. You'll be all right. It'll be okay." In that moment, I've just given off this. I want to communicate. I am struggling. I'm having a hard time. I'm finding this difficult. And if my friend just suddenly says, "Oh, don't worry, it'll be better next week," it's really kind of just not sitting with me in that difficult feeling. It's just, you know, from a good place. That friend's trying to reassure me and try and make me feel better. But it just feels very, very different.
Mhm.
Okay. So Vicky, why have we put these sentences
Yeah.
there?
We added this extra bit because what we hear for all of us when we're learning to kind of respond in a different way, to say things a bit differently that we're not used to, it can be helpful sometimes to just have a few kind of keywords in our mind that we can go to, because often when this kind of stuff, we can get a bit stuck in the moment going, God, what would I say now? What would they say, to try and communicate acceptance? So what we're offering here is some key phrases that we found helpful in our learning of this model, and that parents let us know are helpful to draw on. So some of the key ones are, we often might say no wonder. So a nice go-to is, no wonder you're so angry, or no wonder you're frustrated with me, no wonder you're furious. So that's helpful sometimes as a bit of a go-to. And just to warn parents that, particularly for those of you with kids who are older, when we start speaking in a different way, our kids will be queued up to this. And sometimes, you know, we often hear parents say, I said that, and then they said, why are you speaking to me in that funny way? Or why are you talking in that weird way? Stop it. And just to say that you're going to feel self-conscious and perhaps a bit of a wally using words that aren't, you're trying to find words that fit for you. What we kind of urge you is, don't be put off by that. That's just them. They don't want you to get too close to how they're feeling, because when they've been vulnerable before, it's been painful for them. So their instinct is to try and push you away. So, you know, don't, at times you'll need to perhaps step away and resource yourself again, but don't take that as you're getting this wrong. Actually, that's a sign that you're getting this right. So no wonder that was so tricky, or that was really tough. Gosh, that's, you know, we would often say, gosh, that sounds tough, or wow, yeah, that's really hard. So whatever phrase might be more natural for you, just commenting on how hard it is, or what a rubbish day, that sounds awful. Those kinds of phrases can communicate really simply and effectively. You're kind of taking it in a little bit more and appreciating that, for whatever reason, this is a big deal for your child and they're stuck in it.
That's really helpful, Vicky, and it's really good that you were talking about, yeah, how we might try this with our child and not get a great response, and just talking about the idea of just persevering, being kind to yourself, playing with it. And I always really like the analogy of how all our relationships are like a dance. So any relationship you have with anybody, you have a bit of a familiar dance, that this is the way we interact with each other, this is the way we communicate, and that dance is a bit like dance steps that you both learned. All of a sudden you've come along with a different dance move, and no wonder they're jarred and thinking, this isn't what we normally do, this isn't how we dance together. But what we often find is, over time, if you continue to put in these new moves, your partner, your child, will begin to learn, this is how we do this new dance. It'll take a while, you'll kind of step on each other's toes a little bit and trip over, but eventually you guys start to learn your own new dance.
Mm-hmm.
So this quote I have here is something that an adopted mother said to me. So we're talking about, yeah, empathy and acceptance. And I just love this phrase, because I think this is really taps into a really common concern of, if my child conveys to me a difficult emotional feeling, and I kind of spend time talking about that, maybe that would mean actually that they get stuck in that kind of really low feeling, and kind of just, I'm going to make it worse, and, you know, basically I'll be opening a can of worms. So what very naturally people can often do is, if you maybe see your child start to perhaps go down in mood. Maybe they're just talking about something that's really hard and they're really sort of sad, or they're feeling just really just low in general. A very natural response from all of us, particularly adults, is to desperately try to lift them out of it. Like, oh, come on, it'll be all right. Don't worry about it. Like, let's do something fun right now. Okay, let's go and play here with this game, or let's go eat some of your nice favorite food. And so when this idea of if this blue arrow represents the child kind of demonstrating like, oh, I had a really rubbish day at school today, and that parent very naturally tries to try and bring them back up, say, oh no, come on, like tomorrow will be a new day, you'll be all right, let's do something fun now. And the child continues to kind of go down and feeling really stuck in their low mood, and the adult continues to kind of push up against it and try and prevent it. So even though the adult is trying as desperately as can, this red arrow to help lift their child out of this difficult feeling, you see that the child still continues to go down.
It's almost like the child is working harder to show their parents how bad it feels.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this adult here in red is desperately trying to lift them out of this difficult feeling the child is experiencing. But what we actually find is when we do this as human beings, this kind of isn't matching where this child is at. So what actually happens is the child might stay a bit more stuck in this for a bit longer. So they're down in this difficult feeling, this difficult emotion, and you're still desperately trying as that lovely kind adult to try and lift them out of this. But because you're kind of almost not accepting and not showing that empathy for that difficult feeling, it can often mean that that child can stay in that difficult feeling for longer. So what we're suggesting instead is having a go with using that acceptance and that empathy to go with the difficult feeling that your child is conveying. So if they're sad, going with that sadness. If they're worried, talking about the worry, actually accepting that they feel anxious. If maybe they're really angry about something that happened with their friend, just sticking with them and allowing them to feel that anger. So almost instead, if again the blue arrow is the child and the red arrow is the adult, you're going with them with that feeling. So we're going down together, you're accepting it, you have empathy for it. And what we actually find often happens with human beings is if we spend a bit of time doing this, actually often means that anybody, but in this case this child, is much more likely to start to come back up. So actually start to naturally come out of this difficult feeling because it's being processed, it's being talked about, it's being accepted. And then you as adult can start to come up back with them.
And I've shared with Matt that I find this this way of visually doing the arrows really helpful, particularly to kind of track where we are as parents. And all of us will find certain emotions in our children more difficult. We're human. And so what we're inviting you, I guess, to think about is how can you extend your tolerance to just keep with your child for just a little bit longer. And by a little bit longer, we're meaning half a minute, 10 seconds even. So for example, if I find anger tricky in my child, so when they get angry I will try and coax them out of the anger rather than challenging myself. Just hang in there a little bit longer. I know you're angry, it's okay, you're angry, I get it. So for me, I'm picturing halfway down the arrow that Matt has drawn, halfway down the dip, just challenging myself just a few seconds longer in that arrow before it gets intolerable and I have to go back to my usual strategies. But I guess that parents have found this helpful because it feels more doable. Just stick with that tough emotion just a little bit longer and see what happens. And it's really interesting how it is. I guess we would just say give it a go, because what we hear and what we experience, I guess clinically and in our parenting, is that it really is the stuff that starts to shift things in those kind of more manageable emotions. So maybe just when you're in it, just track yourself and go just a little bit longer, sit alongside this, allow it, tolerate the feeling, not the behavior.
A really recent example that a family shared with me was how previously when their child would say fall over and scrape their knee, they would be very understandably like, oh come on, like you'll be all right, come on, let's brush it off, right, off we go, we're going to keep walking, we're going to keep heading off on our walk, right, okay, look over here, what's that in the tree? And in that moment that child is just devastated. They've grazed their knee, they're feeling pain. This family working was absolutely fantastic. They had a go at kind of responding in a different way, and so their kind of going with the downward arrow was kind of like, oh my goodness, we're here having a nice walk, and you've fallen over and you hurt your knee. Oh my goodness, come here, let me have a look at this knee. Oh, for goodness, oh dear, dear, dear. You know, you want to just be enjoying it, and now you've hurt your knee, and it really, really hurts. Right, come here, let's see if we can make it better. Oh, it really hurts, doesn't it? I can see. And just kind of really going with it in that moment. That child is just devastated and in pain, and even though it's a tiny scratch, in that moment they're feeling that way. And this family have been absolutely fantastic and described how they've had a go at playing at this and finding the right words that work for them, and they've really noticed a big difference. That what previously might have been, you know, half an hour to an hour of their child screaming and just not wanting to carry on engaging in the walk, and just kind of really, really distressed and nothing working, just spend a couple more minutes just kind of being all there in that difficult feeling, helps that child then to come back out.
I think that's a really great example, Matt, and it was reminding me about perhaps like some tips for parents traveling down these arrows in a different way. In those moments where you find the instinct of, oh, come on, just get on with it. It's only a small scratch, you know, that kind of impulse we all have, instinct, is to just take a small moment to regulate yourself, whether that's a breath. I know, you know, very easily when we get stressed, we get short of breath or tense. Just take a deeper, you know, subtle breath, just any small thing to regulate yourself, to then continue down those arrows, can be really helpful for parents, because those are the times that we start to trip and become dysregulated ourselves.
Absolutely. And as the quote there, the reference at the bottom, so this is an idea used in circle security training, and we just think it's fantastic. And often they describe this as the idea of being with. So just being with that difficult feeling or emotion can often lead to more quickly being able to come out of that difficult place. So Vicky, we talked a lot about this, didn't we, sort of prior to this presentation, and we were finding it hard, weren't we, to kind of really articulate the key messages. But I guess this is idea, isn't it, of kind of having a go at judging what's going to be okay in this moment in terms of how close or far you are from your child when they're in a difficult place. Tell us more.
So I guess what we're holding in mind, what we're asking you is, broadly in this series, before you jump to now that behavior is not okay, we got to think of consequences, the reasoning stuff. We're asking you to first help your child co-regulate, then relate to them before you get there. And so we're asking you to kind of spend some time still resisting, jump into the reasoning, to connect with your child in a relationship way. And of course, ideally what that would look like would be a cwtch, would be a big cuddle connection where you kind of repair together and feel close again because there's been a rupture. Sometimes, depending on your child's early experiences of relationships and their level of trauma, sometimes a child will be very comfortable with that kind of intimacy of a cwtch, or even tolerating you going, I know that's hard. They will be able to listen to it, stay with you in it. So that's great if your child's at that point. What our slide here is about is when often children who've had those early, very difficult starts, is that being close to somebody is really frightening. It means that they have to be vulnerable. They might have actually been hurt through being close, or they might not even really have learned that closeness can feel okay because they've not had enough experience of it. So these are the kids that when you say something like, gosh, that sounds really hard, they'll shout, shut up, or go away. Or when they graze their knee and you try and cuddle them, they'll push you away and they'll go and run off and hide behind the slide and not allow you close. So or a teenager who will slam their door, march up to the bedroom, slam their door, even though you know they're really upset and need you, they won't let you near them. So this is about when our children are finding it hard to come close and relate. So what we're saying, and often parents will say to us, well, I try to say that, I try to kind of say, are you all right? Where usually I'd lecture them about, this is not okay to, smash your mobile phone. I try to go, are you all right? Do you need a cuddle? And the child would swear at them or walk away. So this is what we're talking about, is not it's not working, they need something different. What we're saying is, so every child will need that connection, but how do we bring that connection to them in a way that they can tolerate? So it's a bit of a connection that they're not used to, but in a way that doesn't overwhelm them either. For those of you interested, Bruce Perry talks about this as dosing. And what we mean by this is, so how do we bring a bit of connection even though we might be physically further apart? So some examples that perhaps bring it to life. I like this idea about how how we orbit around our children, and it makes me think of the circle of security. So if our child is a planet, how do we, if they won't let us land on their planet and be with them, how do we kind of orbit around them in the way that they can tolerate? So one example, a mum brought with us, an adoptive parent, was, so I'll give a small child example first. So this is a 3-year-old who, whenever he would wake from his nap in the cot and she'd come in and go, "Good morning, sweetheart, are you all right?" and go to cuddle him, he would just be furious and he would push her away, he would reject her. And, you know, this is heartbreaking when you've got so much love to give and are wanting to connect with your child. So I kind of hold in, you know, his early trauma stuff, why that makes sense. So what she did instead to try and show some safety and connectedness was she would come into the room, sit on the side rocking chair and pick up a teddy and go, "I know, John's waking up now, he's sleepy, it's hard, I know," and would just cuddle the bear and rock the bear and just be in the room, regulated, not putting any pressure on him to reciprocate or to come close. So that's how she showed, kind of, she got into his orbit, but without overwhelming him. And I guess what we say is that takes time. It will take time for that little toddler to eventually let this mum pick him up and for him to feel that warmth in that way. She found that she'd have to sit for a good 20 minutes in that chair before he would then tolerate her coming closer and accepting the cuddle. And again, developmentally, that will take weeks and months before you get to the lovely stage where she could just go in and pick him up and scoop him up and cuddle him. So that's an example about how you might communicate, I'm here, you're safe, with your presence, by coming physically a bit closer but not too close so that it overwhelms our children. We thought about a teenager, didn't we, Matt, what that might look like? So
yeah, so kind of that idea of how you know, it's a very common thing with that experience that Vicky described earlier of kind of, you know, you fall out, have an argument, teenager storms off, slams the door. Okay, so how on earth can you know, get into their orbit? Well, it may be that actually you're not going to be able to get into their room and speak to them, be with them, but maybe instead it could be perhaps just go to their door. Obviously important to respect their wishes, that they want to kind of just be in their room right now, and maybe just give a bit of a knock and just sort of say something like, I know, you know, you're just super angry right now. Like, we've had a bit of an argument, haven't we? Just so you know, like, I'm going to be out here, okay, just in case you know, do want to check in. I am here if you do want to talk. Or it could be, you know, I'm going to be next door in my bedroom, or I'm going to be down in the kitchen. But just know that I really get it. You're really having a rubbish time right now, but I'm here, and just right now it's just too much for us to kind of be close together. But I'm here when you're ready. So you're very far out on the orbit. You know, you're absolutely, you know, you're not landing on their planet, but you give you a message of, you know, you are there, you're in the house, you are present, you are thinking of them, and it may well be that actually, you know what, it takes some time, and it may even be like the next day that teenager is happy to kind of speak to you, but they're getting a clear message that you are with them in the way that it feels possible at that time.
And that could be that the point of an orbit is it keeps coming around, even though the child is signaling, get away, get out of my solar system. So even that at the initial kind of invitation, the checking in might be the knocking the door. Love, do you want a cup of tea? All right, whatever they might answer, but still not being too put off by that. And that's not saying go every 5 minutes and bother them, but that's the intervals of just saying, just I'm here, just going to make some dinner, you know, at intervals that feels okay, just to let them know that they won't be used to that. They won't be able to go, I'm really struggling to accept you close. Can you keep trying with me because this is hard? And it doesn't require you to martyr yourself either and subjugate everything, particularly when you're angry. So we're just kind of offering a, where possible and how much as possible, do a bit of an orbit, depending on what that it might look like for your child.
And then with kind of like the verbal and non-verbal stuff, I guess it's kind of just being aware that sometimes you won't be able to have a conversation. You might just have to do little tiny bits, and then the rest is just going to be a non-verbal communication. So, example that comes to my mind is if you imagine you're in the living room with a 5-year-old, and they are really fed up, and they're raising, and they're stomping around the room, and perhaps maybe they're kind of I don't know, playing with toys in a really strong boisterous way, or maybe they're like throwing things, and it's just having a go at kind of just, you might do a tiny little bit of verbal of kind of like, oh wow, that was really hard, wasn't it? Gosh, yeah, I can see you're really, really angry right now. And then maybe it's a case of less words, but more just kind of, okay, I'm going to sit on the sofa. And you're just portraying, really trying to give off that sense of empathy, understanding that you're with them, really conveying that you get that they're struggling, just through your body language, and just being in that room. You're being in that room, and sort of indicating that you're with them. You know, you get where they're at, you accepting that it's hard for them right now, and that you're there. And if they, are able to start come down and to tolerate it, you are there, and they can come towards you if that feels right for them.
Mm. And we talked as well, Matt, didn't we, about often when parents try and communicate empathy with words, a child will or adolescent will very quickly push them away or shout "shut up" or whatever. And so what we talk about is they still need to experience, or they need to learn to experience this in a safe way. So often we talk about how do we bring those conversations a little nearer, but that aren't too intense, that it's direct. So we think sometimes about parents often have a conversation. If there's two of you parenting, you might talk to each other about just as simple as, gosh, he's finding that hard. He really wanted that biscuit and he couldn't have it because it's dinner time, for example. Or you might, a child often will listen to that and tolerate that because it doesn't require a response from them, or they're not kind of in it. Or so often parents might talk to the dog or the cat and say, gosh, she's angry right now, it's really hard, as simple as that. Or I've got one great mum who talks to the pasta when she's cooking it. That's one way the child will tolerate hearing a bit of empathy for her about what she's finding tricky. But the kind of the wider, what's the word, like the widest, furthest away example I've heard from parents is one teenage boy wouldn't even tolerate talking in the vicinity in the room. The only way he'd listen is when parents went into the different room, lowered their voices and pretended to speak to that friend, call a friend on the phone and just say, he's had a really hard day, school is just so overwhelming sometimes. Then when he heard the hushed tones, he would listen in. And so she could see him on the stairs, obviously, it's not that discreet. But I guess what we're saying is, find what orbit your child will tolerate to experience, to hear you communicate in this sense of, this is hard, I'm with them, I'm here. So what that looks like will depend on your child's tolerance of how to experience connection and age, stage, all those things.
Lovely. Okay, so shall I move us on?
Yeah.
So just to really bring it back to a slide we've seen before, so we are still very much thinking about how we are working with the limbic brain. So we're working in the downstairs brain, and we're hoping that because that regulation stuff has been done first, and then maybe you thought you'd be able to do a bit more of this relation connection stuff, hopefully that might help that child's brain begins to start to go towards our upstairs brain. And yeah, that's why this stuff's so important.
I like this reminder here, Matt, because it was reminding me that what we often hear, and this is part of it, is when we start to relate. So our kids are regulating, they're starting to come back online in their thinking, and we're trying to connect with them, not just carry on as if, they want to just carry on and forget anything ever happened because they'll be in shame. But our attempts, and sometimes we'll be clumsy with it. We always are. We still will be. It might trigger them into, hey, get away from me. So they might flip again, and then we go back to just helping them regulate in whatever ways works. So just to acknowledge that your kid might flip up again, and you might have to go back down the triangle. That's not to say you're getting it wrong. It's just that this is very new for your child and you, and that's part of the learning and where we'll always travel.
Yeah. So we've got some final kind of general top tips to hold in mind. So really, really important to try as hard as you can, just generally with acceptance and empathy, to not go straight to reassurance. Absolutely might well be that after a few sort of accepting and empathic comments, or you might be able to tip into reassurance, but really just to hold back as long as you can, to not problem solving. So obviously a massive part of just being a parent is you are helping fix the world for your child. You are giving them solutions. And what we're asking you to have a go at is to not make that your go-to response. Just try and do empathy, try and do acceptance.
This is very challenging, Matt, isn't it?
It's
For those
really
of you parents who are really good at problem solving,
yeah.
and for any of you who are really used talking to overcome things. So yeah, it's really challenging, particularly when you're very good at it.
And then yes, and not to silver line things. So just really tap into that, just remembering of if a child says, oh, I did rubbish at that maths test. You go like, oh, but you did really well in your science. It's kind of like in that moment, if you're not sitting with that feeling that they're really annoyed or sad, they've not done well in their maths test. So try not to silver line things, and just all emotions are okay. So there's many sort of philosophical concepts to talk about how true happiness is actually the full spectrum of all human emotions, because we are humans and we experience all sorts of emotions, and is wonderful if we can just accept that they're all okay, allow them all to have space, and often that makes it much more manageable and much more likely that we're going to come back to our baseline.
And again, that distinction about all emotions are okay. We're not saying all behaviors are okay. So it's okay to feel angry. It's not okay to hit and hurt. So I guess just bringing that subtle but important distinction.
Really important. And then lastly, kind of really just what we just were speaking about on the previous slide. So think about playing with that idea of being where you're at in terms of your child's orbit. So being in their presence and using non-verbals can have a really big impact. You don't have to always be focusing on the words that you're using. Okay, so that brings us to the end. So thank you very much. Go on, Vicky.
So I just say, so we'll be moving on to reason in the next clip to kind of complete explaining that triangle.
Thanks for watching.
Thanks, bye.